listener production.
Hey, I'm Sasha Barbagat. Welcome to this episode of The Briefing. Australia is currently in the grip of an unprecedented teacher shortage. Enrolments in teaching degrees have dropped by almost 20% this year compared to 2023. And there are concerns from the union that if we keep going down this road, public education could be under threat. New research by McCrindle is shining a light on the pressures our current teachers are facing and why 58% of educators are considering leaving the profession. Joining me now to discuss the latest figures is Mark McCrindle. He's a social researcher and demographer, and he's the principal at McCrindle Research. Mark, thanks for your time today. You've been tracking these numbers for a while. How do this year's compare to previous studies?
Well, teaching pre-pandemic had a lot of stickiness. People were seeing it as a vocation and they were teachers for life. That changed, and particularly in the last couple of years, there's been a high proportion of teachers, in fact, almost 7 in 10, saying that they've considered leaving the profession in the last 2 years. It was exhausting, I think, going from normal traditional teaching to delivering online and indeed having to deliver online lessons as well as some in the classroom, and then finding the new normal since then. And of course, all the colleagues of teachers are doing work from home and got great flexibility, and they're really, loving the freedoms that they've had. Meanwhile, teaching, which is a place-bound profession, they have to keep turning up to work, to the school, and not quite getting the same flexibility as their peers. So that has impaired it. I mean, the good news on the latest results is that the proportion has declined slightly. So it's more like 6 in 10 have considered leaving, not the 7 in 10 that we saw at the peak a little over a year ago. But nonetheless, that's a pretty significant challenge.
Would you be confident then that COVID perhaps amplified this restlessness, I suppose, among teachers who are feeling overworked and underappreciated during the pandemic years, and that maybe we're starting to see a correction?
Yeah, definitely. It was a great disruptor for all jobs and roles, but teachers were at the crossroads of it because they're dealing with the very youngest. They had to go online. They're dealing with the parents and sometimes grandparents. There's the staffing side. We saw shortfalls. We saw people move away from locations, and school is very much geographically based. It's community based. And so if you've got to travel a lot, that sort of impairs the experience. And of course, pre-pandemic, when teachers were talking to their professional colleagues in other sectors, the colleagues were saying, wow, you got a good, you do 9 to 3, that's pretty cruisy hours. You've got all the school holidays. You work locally to where you live, in your local school. That's fantastic. That's all flipped now, as I said, because the banking or the insurance professional colleagues are saying, well, I work from home most of the time and I'm flexible with hours and I can take holidays when I want them, and I don't have to commute at all. So that's the big challenge. Now, the profession of teaching always paid a little less than what they might have been getting in the big end of town in a corporate. But, they had the work-life balance, they had the flexibility, they had the community connection. As they lost some of that, and still their wages aren't up with the professional colleagues, that's added to the pain. And when we asked people, why have you considered leaving, it was around the issues of work-life balance and the lack of flexibility, but also, pay in a cost of living challenge comes to the fore as well.
Workload seems to be a really big one as well. And I know my cousin is 2 years into her teaching career after studying pre and through COVID. And she's at work at 7:30 in the morning. She doesn't leave until 5 p.m. And she's teaching year 2. So it's not, year 12 where you're marking and you've got all this extra pressure to get your students through their HSC or their VCE. You're working with kids who are still learning how to read and write. And while obviously that's important, you wouldn't expect the workload of a teacher of year 2s to be so intense. How much of the workload issue is what's impacting teachers' decision to consider leaving the profession?
Yeah, that's a big one. And as you said, teaching is far from 9 to 3, and it's far from just those 40 weeks of the school term year, because there's a lot that goes on beyond. Now, for teachers, they're feeling 4 key pressures. Firstly, NAPLAN or performance results compared to sort of global comparators is not as good. So there's pressure to turn that around. Then you've got the parental pressure and expectations of the individual child teachers teach classes, but parents care about individuals. And so teachers have to tune their attention both to the whole class and individuals. Thirdly, you've got curriculum creep, which is that term for more and more things getting added to the school curriculum. If there's an issue around water safety or environmental or maybe animal welfare, whatever it might be, well, let's bring that into the course. Let's get that taught in the school system. And so that can squeeze out some of the traditional numeracy and literacy, and we're already struggling to keep that as effective as we can. And then the fourth issue is just the administration, the bureaucracy, you might say the paperwork of the profession. And that has increased. Now, we want our schools to be well regulated. We're sophisticated in our society. We don't want to, let record keeping lapse. But if it all lands in the laps of the teachers who are busy with all those other areas, that can start to remove the joy of teachers who say, I want to be in the classroom. I chose this to impact children and the future, and I'm spending a lot of time in my office after hours doing a lot of paperwork.
I want to talk a bit more about the parental pressure aspect. There was a recent news story, is the best way to put it, that was talking about how basic manners were going to be taught again in the classroom. So lining up before you enter, putting your hand up to speak. To me and you, those things might sound like no-brainers, but apparently they're falling out in the classroom. And so the pressure on teachers to kind of be everything for their students, how much of that do you think is contributing to their feelings of being overworked and underappreciated?
Well, it's a big challenge and it's a big cause. That old saying, it takes a village to raise a child, is true. We need all of our community to be involved, parents to be involved. And we're seeing a few trends. Firstly, parents outsourcing not just the academic education of their children, but the social development of their children and the physical health and well-being, the emotional side of the development of their children as well. And that ought not land in the laps of just one entity, being the school. And, if we look back historically, we had a lot more of these social development organizations, these mediating institutions in our society. We had faith-based groups or worship communities as part of that, churches and synagogues, etc. We had youth development organizations. Maybe the kids were part of Scouts or Guides or some other youth group. We also had other clubs, maybe sporting clubs that they were part of, where they're developing team skills and physical activity. And what's happened in our busy lives, and indeed as screens have overtaken, is that a lot of those organizations have fallen away. A lot of families aren't as connected. And outside of the school community, there's nothing else. And so they're pushing, if you like, more and more on the teacher, on the school, to support them in raising the child, in developing the child. And that, of course, ends up putting pressure on the teacher.
Let's talk about enrolments. Uni enrolments, or rather admissions to teaching degrees, were down 19.4% for this year's cohort compared to the 2023 cohort. Why are people not as interested in teaching as they used to be?
Well, teaching has always been called that vocation because you had people choosing it, not because it's just a job, but because it's a means of purpose and impact and making a difference. And it's been called the noble profession for great reasons. And I guess you'd say those in healthcare are part of that approach as well. But what we've had over the last couple of decades is a lot more organizations offer that purpose, meaning and contribution pathway to young people. The not-for-profit sector is now the largest sector of employment in Australia, the charity sector. It's even above retail in terms of the total number of employees. And there you've got people choosing that pathway because they say, you know what, I don't just want the money or the job security anymore. I'm looking for meaning and values alignment, purpose and impact. And so in a sense, teaching, which really offer that pathway, is now more competitive with other areas as well. There are more options for people looking for that, and they're headed in those directions. Secondly, you've got flexibility in those other areas, as we discussed, which teaching, because while the parents might be doing work from home, they don't want their teacher to work from home. They want their teacher in the classroom with their children. And so it's hard to see how to crack that nut where teachers can have a bit more flexibility. And thirdly, you've just got, amidst the immediate challenges of students graduating from university with study debts, looking at the cost of rent and the cost of home ownership. They're saying, well, I do need to think about the financial side, and there are a lot of professions offering higher salaries. Now, teaching, the profession has really stepped up in the last couple of years with some significant pay rises for first years. The starting salary is quite competitive now, but there have been more options, more availability of other pathways for young people, and so we have struggled to get young people into teaching degrees.
And look, before we let you go, Mark, there has been government attention on teacher shortages and funding announced for, encouraging young people to take up the profession and study at a university. The Education Union has warned in the past that if trends like this continue, where we're seeing less people enrolling and more teachers wanting to leave, that it could affect the viability of public education in Australia. What would that mean?
Well, it's a big challenge. We're facing pretty significant retirements over the next few years. The teachers that are hitting their 50s and looking towards the sixth decade of their life, they came in when there's a pretty good retirement package, and the pathways mean that many of them aren't prepared to work into their 60s or beyond. So that's all to say we're approaching big retirements, both in teachers and the leadership of our schools, at the time that demand in terms of student growth is great and the supply of young people coming through is under challenge. So it's the perfect storm, and it does need some pretty nuanced solutions to solve that one.
We'll have to follow up with the people in power to see what they're doing about it. Mark McCrindle, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Sasha.
Thanks for listening to today's briefing. That is all for this episode. Before you go, we would love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. We're also on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Sasha Barbagat. See you next time.